chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Dad.
Absolutely. Chapter 2, which is an interesting short chapter and rather constrained in its location. It's called The Vanishing Glass. I was thinking about the way in which characters are generated, and a real character, in some way, you have to have is a part of the author. So if you're writing a character and the character is going to be realistic and engaging and fully fleshed, somehow or other you have to be able to identify with that character. You have to be able to think in that character's way. You have to be able to think through that character's mind.
Yes.
So you're generating their speech, you're generating their thoughts, and if they're going to be plausible, then really it has to be something that you believe in, something that's a part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was thinking about this, I thought, how on earth does this apply to J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series? Because she's inventing magicians, she's inventing witches, wizards, and even the Dursleys.
Yes.
So on that thought, it was very easy to picture J.K. Rowling sitting in the cafe in Edinburgh, warming her tootsies on there at the expense of their central heating, and writing from a perspective of Harry Potter and the wizards, the wizarding community, because she was an outsider, they're outsiders. She's excluded, they're excluded. She's fantasizing about somebody coming and rescuing her from this situation. Harry Potter's sitting at the Dursleys, thinking about
In the cupboard under the stairs.
in the cupboard under the stairs, and imagining that some unknown relative will come and rescue him, but nobody shows up, at least until his 11th birthday. So that was the first sort of thought. I don't know what you think.
Yes, and I think we spoke about this, that the Dursleys are the antagonists of the mundane, because obviously we're going to have various antagonists Harry comes up against at Hogwarts, in sort of ascending order: Draco, Snape, Voldemort. But at Privet Drive, which is the kind of place we start every book, you've got the antagonists of the mundane realm, who are these monstrous, figures really tormenting Harry.
Yeah, and so it was at that point that I wondered how she related to them. How did J.K. actually relate to these rather monstrous people? And I realised that she doesn't. In other words, she's external to the Dursleys. She sees the Dursleys purely from the outside. We never really get to see much beyond a very basic narrative account of their internal life. And you realise that that's why they are caricatures. They're not actually real characters. They are cartoons of themselves or of the external mundane world.
And they're sort of in a package with Privet Drive. They're almost, what is the word I want, like items of furniture. They're part of the landscape of Privet Drive more than anything else, aren't they?
Yes, and in a sense, Privet Drive is part of their landscape. But there's no reality, there's no sympathy with the Dursleys. You have the dreadful Dudley, you have Aunt Petunia, who is absolutely insufferable, and of course Uncle Vernon, who is the most buffoonish character that you could get. And in a children's book, that's obviously a very, very powerful thing, because cartoons and caricatures are something that children don't need very much subtlety. They don't need a huge amount of experience to be able to relate to. Think of Tom and Jerry, think of Daffy Duck. The Dursleys live in that cartoon world.
Yes, and we have chapter 2 starting with Privet Drive has not changed. 10 years have passed, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. And the sun rose on the same tidy gardens and lit the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room. So chapter 2 begins with a jump forward in time, but it's been frozen in amber in a way. And just one of the things was, by the end of the series, Vernon hasn't changed at all. He's undergone no character arc really. Petunia, we only kind of learn more about her, but she doesn't really soften at all. I mean, we kind of, I think we become a bit more sympathetic because we understand more about her by the final book. And Dudley is really the only one who does change and undergo a bit of an arc. And I think, even to the extent that in the future, him and Harry sort of have more of a family relationship than when they were actually under the same roof. But as you say, they're very static in a way. They don't change, so they are kind of one-dimensional. I mean, they're so delightful and so funny and really monstrous and terrorizing. And in this first book in particular, their abuse of Harry is painted in a comical way, and Harry's got a very sort of stoical and kind of he's got very humorous views of Dudley as like a
pig in a wig. Was it
a pig in a wig? And at the zoo he sees a gorilla that looks like Dudley. So it's easy to not take it too seriously because that's the tone J.K. Rowling's writing it in, and that Harry is sort of taking it all in stride in a way, even though it's objectively it's horrifying really what they're doing to Harry, but
it's a cartoon. It's absolutely a cartoon. And so it's in exactly the same sense as, a cartoon gets blatted and then it wakes up. If you've seen Roger Rabbit, the whole thing about a cartoon and the way that Roger Rabbit works.
Or like Matilda by Roald Dahl, where the head Mrs. Trunchbull is picking the girl up by the pigtails and swinging around the playground and stuff.
Don't laugh. I had a teacher.
What?
When I was at school.
He picked you up by your pigtails.
Not me. We had an Afrikaans teacher, and she decided that she was going to teach us to speak Afrikaans. And she said to us, in Afrikaans, you roll your R's. You don't say R, you roll your R's. Now, class, we will hear you all roll your R's. So all of us go around, rrr, rrr, rrr. And eventually she gets to Cornelius Storm. Oh. And Corny's Afrikaans. And the thing about Corny is he's sitting in this English language class, and he wants to be seen as being English. He has no desire to be seen as the only little Afrikaans boy. So she says to him, right, Cornelius, Storm, you are Afrikaans. You can show these children how to say their R's. And she says, now say your name. He says, Cornelius Storm. So she says, no, say it properly in Afrikaans. Cornelius Storm, come up to the front. And she says, now say, Cornelius Storm. Cornelius Storm.
Oh, God.
Eventually, after about 10 minutes of this, she grabs him by the back of his neck and flings him down the aisle of the classroom. And he falls on the ground at the back. I mean, so Mrs. Trunchbull is not so far-fetched as you might think.
Wow.
The thing I was going to say was, you talked about the time lapse and how she did that, and I really liked the way she'd used the photographs, starting with Dudley as an infant and a beach ball and this sort of thing, and then going forward with his various toys, and I thought that the two things ran very well together: the change in Dudley, the time lapse. And also, we saw the characters of the parents and the way they spoiled Dudley, and also Dudley's change and development over time. So I thought that was absolutely perfectly done. I really enjoyed the way that she used those photographs on the mantelpiece, and the last bit where she says, and there was no trace of Harry in any of this.
You would not know that another boy lived in the house. Yes, and I loved the beginning of the chapter as well, because it felt sort of cinematic. It starts out Privet Drive had not changed, the gardens, the door of the Dursleys, and then their living room, then the mantelpiece. And so this kind of zooming in, it felt really like it built the picture and brought you into their home in this lovely. How would you describe that as a writer, like that use of place and sort of moving into close-up details in a place to convey character?
Yes, I think zooming in this, as you say, it's cinematic graphic rather than purely a literary technique, but that coming in closer and from a distant panoramic view down to a close-up, I think it works really well.
It's a beautiful start to the chapter, and it's a great introduction to Harry because he's been so sidelined out of this family, and so the camera's kind of panning over the the domestic space of the Dursleys, no trace of Harry, and then yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice. So it takes us straight into the kind of present tense of his point of view.
That's right, and the fact that first section, however many, the first half dozen paragraphs, I suppose it must be, have absolutely no trace of Harry, that he is completely excluded. That really does summarize the way she's doing things.
And it's really only him being the point of view character that centers Harry, because everybody else is doing their best really to suppress him and ignore him and sort of paint him out of existence, other than kind of treating him as a servant, like Petunia does.
As she does, indeed. Don't burn the bacon.
Yes, and we start with Dudley's birthday, which is a lovely decision as well, because it's really going to highlight and intensify this contrast between how much Dudley is sort of worshipped in the house and every kind of allowance made for him, and reality is sort of distorted to make him seem like this perfect son, and Harry, reality is again distorted to make him seem like a monster when he's just a lovely kid.
Yeah, and the way that he's excluded from everything. I mean, he's never been to the zoo, and it's obvious that Dudley and his gang peers, or whoever for peers in another on another occasion, have always spent time at the zoo, and they are bored by lunchtime by the time they get there.
They're bored, and it's like this actually makes me think of what makes Harry such a likable protagonist. And there's this book, Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. It's actually more about screenwriting, but the title Save the Cat refers to how are you going to make your protagonist quickly likable to the viewer or the reader. And it's like what makes a likable protagonist. And I think the way that J.K. Rowling's writing Harry, and the contrast between Harry and Dudley. I mean, if you look at how Dudley's behaving, and as once we get to the zoo, we see this, but here with the birthday breakfast, it's like Dudley's really a bottomless pit in terms of just self-gratification, and that relentless drive for self-gratification is sort of combined with this, inability to really feel good for very long. So no matter what the stimulus is, Dudley's just going to get bored really quickly, and he's basically impossible to please. So it's this kind of toxic combination where he's endlessly needing new stuff, and yet no amount of stuff is really going to make him feel grateful or truly fulfilled and happy. And so the aim is to really get the reader to align with the protagonist, and we're going to feel what they feel. We experience the story through their reactions to what's happening. So Harry, as the protagonist here, has so much scope for reacting positively to relatively small good things that happen to him. It's just kind of heartbreaking. He's like, oh, Mrs. Fig's broken her leg, which is the first piece of good luck. And then he's like, so it's kind of comical, but then it's like he gets a little lemon ice lolly at the zoo, because the woman asks him what he wants, which is completely by accident that he even gets anything, but he's very pleased about that. He looks at the animals, and he's never been out. Basically his world is shrunk down to school, the Dursleys, and Mrs. Fig's cat photo album.
I think she describes it very well, and again you can relate this to her life in Edinburgh, where probably her cup of coffee in the morning, which she's probably paying for out of her benefits, is something that she really appreciates, and the warmth of the the cafe.
And down the road when Hagrid comes in, I always remember that him bringing Harry the chocolate birthday cake that's kind of squished because he sat on it and things. And we're going to get to that later in later chapters. But it's how Harry's just bowled over by somebody giving him a cake and making him this sausage sandwich and stuff. And I think that's so crucial if you're a writer, to building a really likable protagonist or other character, is somebody who doesn't have it all, because it's like, where can you go with a character like Dudley? That would really be a challenge to start a book with such an unlikable, awful, spoilt character who's had everything and is a bit desensitized and doesn't have a wide emotional range really as a result of how his parents.
Well, he's very good at punching people.
Very good at punching people. Very good at pretending to cry. Okay.
He's a manipulative little bugger, isn't he?
Yes, he's fantastic. He's fantastic. And the other thing was this dream where Harry says he'd been having a dream. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. That's just like, he's sort of, his mind is inclined towards an affection for bizarre things happening, or sort of like, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but like the strangers coming up to him on the street, the weirdly dressed people. He's like a great kind of blank slate on the one hand, but also he's sort of open and curious and I don't quite know how to describe it, but it's like he has an affection for weirdness that's very like appealing.
I agree, although he does doubt himself. In other words, when the strangers come up, he thinks they know him, and then maybe he just wishes they knew him.
Yes.
Because of this desire for somebody to come and rescue him. So yeah, it's very good. I think we should move from there towards the few glimpses that we get of Harry at this point, and there are the three magic events which he's had, and they are quite indicative, because they generally, the first one is when his hair gets cut and it grows back, and it's completely and utterly, in fact he'd prefer it not to happen, but it's just that nature of his magic that he can't really control.
I think he's very glad the hair grew back in that instance.
Yeah, he obviously didn't want it to be cut to that level, but I think he would have preferred it if it was, because the only thing he likes about his own appearance is his scar.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I actually took this list of, it's quite interesting the way the timeline kind of moves back and forth, because we're sort of told more about Harry as we're departing a bit from Dudley's birthday breakfast and ripping open all of his presents, and then we get into this series of instinctive magic events that have happened to Harry, and these are basically just to set up what's going to happen with the snake at the zoo, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So we get the hair grows back, the ugly jumper shrinks, and then he finds himself on the roof of the school kitchens to escape Dudley's gang.
And it's all kind of the instinctive use of magic, and it's quite, those things interested me because it's clearly an indicator of how J.K. Rowling sees magic. She sees it as a sort of instinctive, innate capability that belongs inside the person. And so Harry is, whatever you might say, he's a powerful magician. And we know that in some way or we learn later, that in some way he and Voldemort are actually opposite sides of the same coin, and it may well be that as a result of the attempt by Voldemort to kill him, Harry has actually acquired some of Voldemort's power, and that in fact Voldemort, if he had not attempted to kill Harry and his parents, would have been a more powerful magician, but he seems to have lost something to Harry.
Yes, and this. I mean, if there's anything else you want to say about these unconscious magic
capabilities
of Harry's, but if you weren't, I was going to move on to just talk about the snake because, well, I just thought the pacing was great at the zoo because you've got a sort of escalation of good events happening to Harry.
Before we go to
ahead.
that, can I just say one other thing about that comes from those first three things, which was the conclusion that when you go to Hogwarts later, we're going to see Harry learn to control and focus his powers, but the powers are pre-existent.
Yes.
And so what Hogwarts is actually going to teach him is control and focus, those two things. And that, I think, leads us straight into the snake, because when we get to the zoo, as you say, there's a lot of the timing and the pacing at the zoo is excellent.
Yeah.
But I think that the same type of magic, instinctive and uncontrolled and unfocused, is exactly there.
Yes, just from a technical perspective, this escalation of better and better things happening. So Mrs. Fig breaks her leg, which Harry sort of is like, sorry, but it's like making my day a lot better. Sucks to be you, Mrs. Fig. He gets to come with the Dursley, so he's not even, it would have been good to get to stay at home alone and mess with some of Dudley's presents, but he gets to actually come with them to the zoo. It's a sunny Saturday. He gets the ice lolly. He gets to have the, cast off of Dudley's Knickerbocker glory. And so it's just like, great. Things couldn't get any better. But of course, and there's a line, I think it's like, it was too good to last or something like that.
Harry should have known it was too good to last, I think is the line.
Yeah, so,
or similar.
In the writing, this kind of, it's this building up of oh God, what's about, things are going great, we're feeling great because Harry's feeling great, and then it's like, oh God, what's he going to do now? Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. It's just so sad.
Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last.
Yes. Okay, so here we're gonna get into the Reptile House, and I just wanted to have this extract from the Book of Symbols, Reflections on Archetypal Images by the Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism. So it's Jungian sort of symbolism, deconstruction of symbols. And Dad, if you just could read the part of this entry on the snake.
Emerging with S-shaped movements from primal waters, spiralling or coiling up on itself like the DNA in every living cell, striking out at lightning speed or deftly slithering away on its limbless belly, and vanishing in a flash, the snake enters our mythologies as cosmic creator, progenitor, destroyer, and sacred being. How eerie a snake can seem. It smells with its flickering forked tongue. It hears through its skin and is particularly sensitive to low-frequency vibrations and tremblings of the earth, linking it with secret, subterranean, oracular mysteries of knowledge.
Oracular?
Oracular.
What's that then?
As of an oracle.
Oh.
Okay.
Love it.
The snake sees through lidless eyes covered by a transparent scale, never blinking, evoking a supernatural vigilance, like the cobra protectively encircling the brow of the Egyptian pharaoh, or the eye of the unconscious psyche that sees where consciousness cannot, or the mesmerizing eye of the legendary hero, or the unflinching eye of death. When the snake withdraws to shed its skin, signifying renewal, rebirth, and immortality, the eye scale becomes milky, sometimes taking on an ethereal, misty blue cast, as though the serpent is entering a meditative state and has access to wisdom beyond our ken. Heat-sensitive infrared radar allows some species of snake to track their prey unerringly in the dark. The jaw of the python unhinges, allowing it to ingest whole prey many times its size. These uncanny feats associate the snake with the relentless, death-dealing aspect of nature, or with the instinctual psyche and its sudden and unexpected manifestations, its painful and dangerous interventions in our affairs, and its frightening effects.
But in terms of what the snake represents through the whole series, I think it's no mistake. She picks a snake. She could have picked any animal. And she picks the Reptile House, which, give me a moment, all sorts of Lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. It was cool and dark in here. I think the gear really shifts in the chapter at this entry into the Reptile House, and it's because it's, in my view, it's because of exactly what we were talking about with magic, the unconscious. It's like all of this that's been repressed in Harry is represented, symbolised in the snake behind the glass. He's trapped at Privet Drive, he's trapped in the cupboard under the stairs, and so...
Oh, he certainly empathises.
And so he
with
empathises with the snake because, the snake is, in a way, his magic energy, his psychic energy, and probably, with his age, moving into another phase of into adolescence, he's sort of coming into his powers. These manifestations of magic are sort of growing stronger, and it's a snake that is the creature that he communicates with magically and sets free. And so it's kind of like, I think this is I don't know what you'd call it in plot structure terms, but this is some kind of threshold that's being crossed in this Reptile House.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to know that he, at this point, understands he can communicate with the snake. I hadn't remembered that the snake only signaled to him all the way through, and that he was talking to the snake. But it was at the end of that, he hears the snake speak. And we only find out much, much later that Harry can actually speak Parseltongue, the snake's languages, or the language of snakes. So one wonders whether this is serendipity, or whether she already knew in writing chapter 2 that Harry would be able to speak Parseltongue. So it's interesting. Did she, at this point, plan Parseltongue for later in the book? Or did she allow him to speak to the snake here, or to understand the snake, and then later in the book remember that and say, aha, he speaks Parseltongue?
Yes, it could be beautifully just intuitive and organic the way it's come through. But I mean, I suppose there is Slytherin, which it's a house he absolutely doesn't want to be in, which is
I don't know.
Which
He's
has
tempted
the snake.
he is actually tempted by Slytherin when he gets to the Sorting Hat. He doesn't want to be in Slytherin. He realizes that he doesn't, but there is some sort of subtle temptation. The snake there is a tempter.
Yes, and the sort, is it Fred and George or Ron or somebody says, there wasn't a dark wizard that didn't come out of Slytherin. And so he's absolutely resistant, even though he's tempted. He's completely resistant, and already it's almost like he has this unstructured, his use of magic as a child is just unstructured and intuitive, instinctive. And so this conversation with the snake is good and positive, and it's only really once he encounters the magic world and the kind of rules and connotations, the context of what being able to speak Parseltongue has, and Slytherin and the snake, and it's those sort of things that put all this negative connotation onto what he was really just doing naturally and unconsciously.
But as I say, I think that he, as an instinctive wizard, has that as a component in his makeup. And going back to what I said earlier on about the encounter with Voldemort and having inherited certain things or some aspects of Voldemort's powers, maybe this Parseltongue capability is also one of the things that links him to Voldemort.
Yes, I think there's kind of I don't know if it's tenuous, but to me there was sort of a link in this chapter between the snake and Harry's scar, his childhood memories that he sort of struggles to access, his dreams and his magic. So it's like this relationship with the unconscious, like this magic he's doing as a child is just instinctive and arising from the unconscious. And later in the books he has, as he has this connection with Voldemort, it's when he's asleep and dreaming that he's at his most vulnerable. And it's like he hasn't learned Parseltongue. It's another thing that arises from his unconscious. So it really just seems like the snake in this chapter is Harry's unconscious, but it's sort of made manifest in the fact that it's released from a cage. just seems really significant, even though the scene itself is sort of, very light and comedic.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the fact that it's in the snake house, the fact that it is a snake, it's all incredibly symbolic and predictive of themes that will come up right through the series.
But I mean, that was really me, like peering into the chapter, because obviously the way she writes it, this isn't a heavy encounter by any means. It's just, if anything, we're just like, it's funny that Dudley and Pierce, run away shrieking, and the snake snaps at them playfully as it kind of slithers past. It's childlike, and it's a comical scene. But I was kind of just really impressed that that kind of weighty symbolism, which will come into play, it has to kind of bear the weight of Voldemort and magic, as a symbol for the whole series. And so it's just interesting that it shows up here in this kind of fairly innocuous, in a way, scene at the zoo.
Yes, but I think that's one of the things about Rowling's writing, that either through, and I can't really believe that it would be conscious design, but if it is, it's magnificently thoughtful. Yes. But I think that she has an instinct for symbolism and myth and mythology and presaging things in the future, because which she will then later on exploit. I guess there must be some balance in her structuring of the book between opportunism and, if you like, the instinctive things that just need focus in their writing.
Yes.
and the careful planning and plotting. She obviously knew or she's claimed to know from the very beginning what the ending would be, and that was a fairly obvious ending. It's a school story, and it goes round in a circle to the ending of Harry going back to the school with his children. But beyond that, the threads and structures that she's building, one has to feel that she invented something as she went along, that she hadn't plotted out in detail all 7 books. No,
and yes, it's kind of in the loose intuitiveness that's that makes the writing work. It would be too much to be ponderous and kind of heavy with stuff at this point. Yeah.
And also remember, this book is purely a children's book.
Yes.
It's only as she gets much further into the series that she starts to add the layers of more adult content onto it. So interesting. How old was she when she wrote the first book?
I don't know. Let me just look it up quickly.
And this was first published in 1997, so one assumes she was writing it in about 1993, 1994, when she would have been in her late 20s.
Wow.
Remember,
she was writing
it takes
her manuscript even longer.
She was she would have been 32 when she was published, but you have to add 2 years for the publication process. You have 23 or 25 rejections, which would not have taken 6 months. So I guess she was writing this probably when she was about 27, 27, 28.
Yes, that's incredible. We're seeing Harry, the archetype, would you say, of the image of a child, kind of in a household where he is sort of excluded and unloved, is a sort of motif. It's something that recurs through the books, in Voldemort especially, where he grows up in the orphanage, and Snape is a lot like this, Sirius is a lot like this. Lily, doesn't Lily have? Is it implied she has quite an unhappy home life as well, away from Hogwarts?
No, with Lily, Petunia is very upset because her parents are proud of Lily's achievements, and the fact that she gets a scholarship to Hogwarts and
Yes.
all of this sort of stuff. So one of the problems that Petunia has is a sort of sibling rivalry
Yes, jealousy.
with Lily, which is I know a chap whose elder brother was killed in a car crash, and his mother kept comparing him with this dead brother, and there was no way he could ever compete, and it didn't do him any good at all. And I think that that's the same problem that Petunia's got,
Yes.
that she is responding to the abilities. It's impossible to compete with Lily,
Yes.
because Lily has all these talents, all this, and Lily is pretty well untouchable. And the best thing from Petunia's point of view that Lily could ever do was to die, which she should have died with everybody else. But Petunia had no way ever of successfully competing with her sister.
Dying with everybody else who?
Well, she would have preferred Harry to have died with her.
That is tough. That is cold. Yes, no,
Yeah.
but that is that. But yeah, these childhood sort of the difficult childhoods. Harry is sort
It's
of
a trope that
but
repeats
yes,
itself
but it's
right
like
through the thing.
yes, and here we have Harry who's going through a really tough. He's living in very challenging circumstances, and he is not going to become, Voldemort or Snape. But he
has the temptation
potential.
and potential to become a Voldemort.
Yes, and that's, I suppose that's setting up a kind of contrast down the line. Is like we're seeing how Harry reacts, and he's not an angel, like reacting as some sort of superhuman person to being neglected in this family, but he's definitely not. He retains his humanity, I suppose, doesn't he? Whereas this is a setup that really embitters and sort of poisons others that we encounter.
Yeah, I like the way she gets out of this chapter as well, because she at school Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. I mean, we've just seen the little bit of light in his environment with the various strangers who have come up to him and greeted him and annoyed Petunia and made her take him out. And then we get brought back to earth with a great thump with this concept of Harry at school and no one's allowed to talk to him. No, it really does sum the chapter up.
Yes, and it's sort of like shrinking the world again. Harry's Uncle Vernon's collapsed on his chair with his
glass
with
of
his
brandy.
glass
Well,
of
actually,
brandy.
with his wife bringing him a glass
Yes,
of brandy.
and he's Harry's basically grounded, or I suppose just never going to be allowed out again. And he's got this, what has he got to look forward to? It's just school is the only other world he's allowed to move in, and that's dominated by Dudley as well.
Although, of course, he does have the knowledge that he's going to stay there and go to the local comprehensive while Dudley is accepted in. What was the name of Dudley's school?
Yes, with the straw boat.
Yes, with the straw smeltings.
Smeltings. Okay, so that's chapter 3 next time.
Chapter 3 next time.
All right. Until next time.
Excellent.